And then from doing the first few star trails in the backyard, because I was too frightened to go off by myself into the dark somewhere.
Hey, Wiki Hunters, welcome back to the Art of Photography podcast, where we share our passion for photography and share how it gives us hope, purpose, and happiness in our life. So today we're gonna talk about astrophotography, and we have someone very special. He is one of my inspiration when I started photography. Actually, there's a few peoples in Perth that really got me into photography, and he was one of them. So I'd like you to welcome Michael Go. How's it going, Michael?
Hi, Stanley. I'm doing well, or actually, I'm doing tiredly, I suppose, if that's actually even a word. I'm always a bit tired. I'm reasonable. There you go.
Wait, are you
Thanks
always
for
tired
having me
because
on.
are you always tired because you're always out at night and shooting like the stars? Is that why?
No, I'm tired frequently because of that, but I'm tired for many other reasons as well. Is that I think in this last week I've shot 7 to 10 events at the moment as well. So therefore, I'm just basically doing, I suppose, photographing maybe an event in the morning, an event, come back quickly, change gear, and then head back out to photograph an awards night or something at the moment. And then it's all the post-process. Whoops, sorry, my camera every now and then will freeze up. And then it's basically post-processing and delivery to clients within fairly quickly. And then still planning for when I'm going out, because I actually have quite a lot of projects on at the moment, which will require me to head out possibly anywhere between a few hundred to maybe 1,000 kilometers based at this point of time for time lapsing.
Oh wow! So what sort of project is it? Is it like more like a personal project, or is it a project that you're doing for someone else?
There's a combination of it, because there are personal projects which you have to do your personal projects, and I'll get to that in a moment. But these are projects for I suppose tourism basis, and also for a documentary on astronomy in Western Australia, which I'm a member of the project team for.
That's amazing.
But you need to always be having your personal projects. I actually discovered, so I'll go off on tangents because I'm a tangential sort of person,
That's
is
all
that
right.
I discovered over the last few years is everyone says, hey, look, have you got this footage or that footage, or and you need to be building up your own personal library for all these things for when clients or people need it. Because I had a project earlier this year and they actually asked me, hey, have you got the Pleiades as a time lapse? And I said, well, if you asked me 3 weeks ago, the answer would be, yes, I can go and get that. But unfortunately, because the stars don't care about what our time frames are, it was actually too late to actually time lapse it anymore.
That's
Yeah, the
hilarious.
universe doesn't care. We have to fit in with the universe.
That is so true. That is so true. So, uh, well, we kind of jump right in there straight away to your project. But usually I want to ask you to introduce yourself and what sort of photography you do, and just share with us a little bit more about yourself that the listener might be interested in.
Okay, of course, my name is Michael Go. I am now a full-time photographer. I actually only went into full-time photography a few years ago, although I've been photographing astrophotography for about 8 years now, I think. It's a little bit blurry. Everything blurs into one after a while. I do a wide variety of photography. So I do commercial photography. I do a lot of event photography, video, aerial. I do your Google 360 photospheres. Of course, your landscape. I when I sorry, off on my tangent again. When I do event photography, I like calling myself John Wick, because you dress in black and you shoot everyone. So
That's awesome.
and I also do, of course, astrophotography, both in terms of your stills and your time lapses. It tends to be more of your landscape astrophotography rather than your DSO at the moment, although it is in my plans to do DSO in the next year, basically.
So explain to us a little bit what is DSO for the listener who might not be familiar with that.
Okay, DSO is deep sky objects. So you're photographing your distant galaxies and I suppose your distant nebula and clusters, your distant celestial objects. I've actually more or less leaned more towards the landscape photography rather than the DSO in the past, because the landscape astrophotography connects you with your landscape, with where you are. So that in my opinion, it's always been, I suppose, lends you to being a little bit more creative in that regard.
Yeah.
And also, off on an aside, is that I've found this was not the purpose of the landscape photography, but landscape photography also lends more to your I suppose appeal for tourism purposes, because a lot of regions and so on say, look, we want to have I suppose, say how good this place is for stargazing and astrophotography. But if you're photographing, say, the Orion Nebula, it's got no connection to where you are.
So do you do more landscape astrophotography because it is more, I suppose, like sellable, or do you find it more interesting to do more landscape photography because of the dynamic of the landscape and how you can, you know, combine them with the stars?
More of the latter. The sellable side of things just happened. I don't believe in photographing unless you're commissioned to do a particular photo shoot. I don't believe in basically going out to do it because it's sellable, but that's just basically been an end result, you know, an additional thing that's come out. It's just that I suppose I love seeing the fantastic landscapes around us and basically combining it with the stars.
So what got you into
Except when it includes
astrophotography?
sheep.
Sorry.
Except when it includes sheep.
So what got you into astrophotography? Why astrophotography?
Okay, I suppose I'll go back a little bit further than that, sorry, because there's a long story about the photography in the first place. One,
Nah, go
we
right
we
ahead.
I originally only got my first DSLR maybe about 11 years ago now, because we drove across Australia and on the way back we thought it wouldn't be nice if we had better photos. And then it basically, I photographed on professional mode for a while, P for professional. And I actually did my first long exposure landscape photo by accident. I said, oh, wow, isn't this great? And of course, nowadays I go, oh my God, that's so average. but but then I saw the fantastic work of a photographer called Corrie White. She's a photographer based in the UK. She does drop collisions. So when you've got one drop hitting another drop and then another drop and it basically spreading out, opened up my mind to thinking, hey, look, you can photograph a lot more than what you can see with the eye. And then that led me down the path of wanting to photograph other things that you can't actually readily see with the eyes. And then that led me to my first star trail, which was from my backyard. So that was my first dip into astrophotography. And the reason why I wanted to do star trails is I thought, I can't remember where I originally saw it, but I thought, oh, that looks fantastic. And I've always been, I suppose, a science fiction fan, being Star Wars, Star Trek, and so on, Battlestar Galactica and the like. So therefore, that was the interest in space. And then from doing the first few star trails in the backyard, because I was too frightened to go off by myself into the dark somewhere, I photographed my first Milky Way at about 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, about 50 kilometers north of Perth by the side of the road. I quite literally drove to a location, hopped out and said, okay, this is where it's going to be, and photographed and popped there went my first Milky Way photo.
Wow,
And then it
interesting.
just kind of went on an insane path after that, because as you know, the astrophotography can be a little bit addictive, and then it was just experiment after experiment, and it just kept on growing bigger and bigger.
So that's really cool. Like that's really cool to hear that. I'd like to check out what was her name? Corey, the
Corey
photographer.
White.
Ori White. Okay, I really have to check that out because that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's good. Thanks for sharing with us. That's good to hear kind of the origin of astrophotography for you. Um, so in terms of you just said earlier, like, it can be scary and intimidating to go out at night on your own, especially when you just started. How did you overcome that to begin with, and how did you, I suppose, get used to it and be okay with it, just being alone in the middle of nowhere when you can't see anything?
I suppose it was there was a little bit of suck it. you just go out and deal with it. Admittedly, the first few times I did astrophotography driving off into the dark, I actually thought of that, hey, look, the Milky Way only rises at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, gee, this is going to be a bit of a hard effort getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning every time to photograph the Milky Way. That was before I knew about Milky Way season and so on. So initially, for the first couple of years, probably, I think I just drove out and then photographed, and I quite literally drove back the same day or same night, as the case may be. And then it was eventually I went off and did overnight trips as well. So I suppose there was a little bit of intimidation to go out by yourself completely. And photograph these things. I suppose earlier on, I used to, apart from the first couple of times, which basically was, like I said, just getting up and driving out at midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning, is that later on, I actually took a friend out with me who's not a photographer. So a friend of mine, Stuart, he'd actually just sit in the car and wait for me while I'd be doing star trails. And
Wow, what a
2 hours
friend.
later, it's a good friend. So it wasn't terribly interesting for him because he'd quite literally just be waiting for me in the dark. And then later on, it was basically just driving out by myself, and it was just building up my confidence of going out by myself. Because I think when I started doing astrophotography as well, I didn't actually know any other photographers. It was actually quite I think a year or so later, which I actually started bumping into other photographers and joining, I suppose, camera groups to actually meet other people. In which case, then all of a sudden you had little mob scenes and so on, where you've got groups of people, everyone parked around you for your astrophotography because no one wants to go off and look for their own compositions. So I think it was just slowly building up that confidence. And now I quite literally will go out and camp or be on the back of my truck and sleep on the tailgate of my truck at times, depending on the location, and photographing through the night.
That's cool. Yeah, that's really cool. That was it was the same for me. I actually afraid of the dark, so I don't know how I got into astrophotography. Actually, I need to kind of think really dig deep on how I overcome that fear. But yeah, and I'm sure many people out there, not only just the dark, but the whole safety, right? It's especially if you're on a foreign land, or a place that you kind of never been to. It can be intimidating. Like, for example, here in Canada, we got the bears is apparently still up, but like they're not hibernating yet, so that's like another thing in there. So what sort of
I suppose, sorry, I'll just jump in a little bit more, is that sometimes still in the dark you go, what the heck am I doing out here? Because you'll hear strange noises, or I was actually at a location which I hadn't been before, so I'd actually injured my back while I was out there. And of course, when you injure your back or injure yourself in any way, you're going, oh, all the other thoughts come into your mind, and you go, why am I out here in the middle of the night? Because you're basically balancing on surfaces which aren't all that great to be out there. So therefore, your mind starts playing tricks on you with all the strange noises that you hear. I saw a post from someone recently that there were wild dogs around where they were, and so they decided to retreat from where they were because they were on the side of a cliff. You don't want to be scared basically to fall off the side of a cliff. And nowadays as well, I actually carry CB radios, a personal locator beacon,
right?
and I'm about to start carrying abseiling equipment as well, just to tie myself off to the things if I need to. I bought myself a little climbing ladder recently as well. Not that I want to be climbing things in the middle of the night, like some photographers I know who have fantastic photos of them climbing cliffs in the middle of the night. But yeah, the safety is always paramount in terms of like you scout your location before it gets dark, so you know where you are. And I've also got a handheld GPS, so I can actually find my way in the dark.
That's awesome. Thanks for bringing that up. Actually, it's really good to tell that to the listeners, because although I feel like a lot of that fear is just, it's not true. It's always good to be prepared, and you're right. Especially when you're out there by yourself. When you start it, it's good to bring a friend, because you kind of just get into it. But even if you've done it for a while, you never know what's going to happen. And bringing a radio or a self-locating beacon can actually save you life. So that's really good point that you bring up there. But one thing that I want to ask you is that all this fear that you had when you're about to kind of start this journey, before you kind of get used to it, do you find that a lot of those fear are just in your head, or is it actually a lot of them are like a real fear that you just haven't come across with yet?
I think majority of the time it's in my head, because I'm quite comfortable most of the time of being out in the dark now, except I'm still not fond of being out in the dark at the side of a cliff. Because I'm not a great fan of heights either, but I used to be an abseiling caving trip leader many years ago.
Oh.
But I'm not fond of heights. I'm not fond of frequently of the dark. But having said that, is that you do sometimes hear stories of, say, I know a story a number of years ago when someone was photographing and then someone turned up with a shotgun.
Wow.
And it was actually just a farmer who was curious and alerted, felt concerned that there was strange lights at a location, I'm assuming. So you do think about that. Most of the time, I'm actually more worried about other people, as there's gear security and my security based on if some strange person comes up and you meet people in the middle of the night. And you go, why are you out here in the middle of the night? So it's more of that rather than, hey, I'm going to have a physical threat of other sorts from animals, especially since I've got the GPS. And because going back to my caving days, I usually go out with multiple light sources. So you look at your redundancy. So I've got my headlamp, I've got handheld torch, and I've got another light source as well, just in case everything goes wrong, in addition to the GPS, which drops breadcrumbs, so I can actually quite literally walk back to where I follow the exact trail of where I came from.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. I think having that contingency is really important, and that breadcrumb that you mentioned is really really paramount, because there's so many times where I've gone hiking, and then if it wasn't for the breadcrumb, I would have it probably would taken me a lot longer to get back, if not lost altogether. So especially in the dark, it's crazy, isn't it? In the dark, like the amount of things you can see there. But one thing that really scares me in Australia is the snakes, because I had a really close encounter with the snakes in in Gibb River Road in Mitchell Falls. So that was really scary. It just sneak up on you. Luckily, it was like more a mature one. But let's go back a little bit. I guess I got so excited. We just go right off. You call your photography Astrophoto Bear.
Yeah.
Yeah, where does that come from? Like give us a little bit like origin of that.
Okay, this is the bear. Okay, many years ago, when the bear actually came up, is I used to be a bank manager.
Uh-huh.
Now, I'm actually, while I can talk for hours about things and so on, I'm quite open with saying, was it oversharing information? the working in the bank, you're always concerned about your privacy and everyone else's privacy. So therefore, I did not actually want to have an online profile with just my name as such. So for many years, people there wasn't actually photos of me on public media either. So what happened was so I was just thinking, well, when your social media platforms came on, is thinking, hey, what sort of title do you want to have? And because I was photographing a lot of Astro stuff, I wanted to have Astro in there. And then this bear was actually celebrating 100 years of flight, and it was actually released on, I think it was my birthday. And I saw it in the shop, and I thought, okay, I'll buy that. And going back a little bit further as to why it has to come with flight is I used to be a online World War II squadron leader.
Oh, wow.
So many years before then as well. So therefore, that's I used to have the hands-on throttle stick, the little track IR system. So when you move your head, it basically shift the point of view within on the monitor as well, and would fly World War II planes all over the place and shoot things. So that was the connection to why the flight thing was important to me. But there was already an Astro Bear as a brand. I think it's a clothing brand in the UK or something. So I didn't choose that. So I thought, well, I'll just create Astro Photo Bear. And that's basically how it happened. And so therefore, it wasn't Michael Go online or anywhere. It was basically Astro Photo Bear. But then the bear basically got more of a brand than I did. So it just stuck. So at the moment, I'm actually doing a little bit of a rebrand. The Astro Photo Bear is staying for the Astro stuff, but I need to, because of course, when commercial clients are finding you for the first time, they go, where's this bear coming from? So you actually need to be a little bit more professional at times as well. So it's basically running your multiple brands. So I actually need to have just a straight Michael Go or something like that. I actually thought of, when going through the rebranding, I thought, because I think portrait photographers, event photographers tend to be quite extroverts. Introvert landscape photographers tend to be more your introverts, and astrophotographers are way out there in the introvert side of things because you're out by yourself all the time. So I thought, as a brand name for the introvert, using my surname, it was Go Away Photography.
It's a go away photography. Yeah, it's really funny because I think I'm a little bit more of extrovert, but I do get like I do love it like when I go out there in the middle of nowhere and just have that quietness. It's like, yeah, it's like a meditation, or it's just so serene, like it's as if you're on your own world and the world problem doesn't exist.
Yes.
It's always so cool to hear to be out there. But there is such a funny story to hear about Astro Photo Bear, because when I first came across to your profile, it was the Astro Photo Bear. I was like, what? It's like, and then I saw the photo and just like, wow, I want to be able to take photos like that. And do you have like an inspiration from like astrophotography side of things, or you kind of just develop that style on your own?
It pretty much all came by itself. I'm not sure I don't know if there was any specific form of inspiration. And I know it sounds terrible, is that I tend to shoot frequently with my blinkers on a bit, because ultimately I've got a giant list of, I think, more than 100 things that I need to photograph on my projects list at the moment. If I want to do this, I want this under this sort of situation. So of course, you see things online and so on every now and then, and you don't want it to, I suppose, create too much of I mean, while it can help create some ideas and say, hey, that's a great idea for me to try out, is that my brain's overflowing with stuff at the moment anyway. So if you actually put too much that's from all the other sources in there, then it might start overwhelming it, and I won't quite say contaminate it, but it basically, I've got too many things on the go as it is, basically, to want to specifically imitate anyone else or create or be inspired by anyone else. I mean, I suppose distant lands. I suppose the originally when I photographed with the figure with the light in his hand and so on, that was actually because something else failed miserably.
Okay.
Originally, I did actually see some work by another photographer. I just can't quite remember which one it was, because I don't want to accidentally credit the wrong photographer for the thing that didn't work of mine. I think it was a photographer that I am connected to, and he did a teleporter photo. So he did like a spinning lights photo,
Yeah.
like your Star Trek teleporter thing.
Uh-huh.
And I back then I thought, wouldn't that be cool to do as a panorama? But then I found out as a panorama, for example, it's a little bit difficult to do that, because the consistency of the light just won't work as a panorama, because you're twirling the light around, so it's going to be different in every single scene. So so I suppose if you think, because I also did some book covers back then as well, is that you create and I did an awful lot of flash work, which actually came from Corey White stuff with the flash photography, with the drop collisions. So I actually just replaced it with, hey, look, if I just hold the light out and you do the photo from the behind, so it actually puts you in that position as like on the cover of a book, is that people put themselves into that position basically as the figure in the scene. And that was actually just stuff that I suppose that just came out.
That's
And I suppose so, in the scheme of things, I guess book covers and so on, like just looking at your magazine covers or watching movies, I like saying now that I can watch sorry, I think I just froze from it. I like saying, hey, I can watch movies now, and strictly speaking, that's research. So in a roundabout sort of the way that, I guess we are, I suppose, a sum of our experiences. So while I'm not specifically chasing inspirations and so on, it just all flows together in there. I guess also this year, more than previous years, inspiration has actually come from client requests. So client requests actually has said, hey, look, can you photograph this or time lapse this? And you go, oh, hang on, but I can do this and this and this and this as well, in terms of what other things flow into your head, basically, when clients actually ask you to do things. I never would have thought of time lapsing some of the objects which I'm chasing now, before they actually said, can you do this? And I said, well, I don't know, I haven't done this before, but who knows, let's just see how it goes. And because of the projects which have been on the go, is that it's made me learn. I mean, I'm definitely an amateur still on this side of things, is that I'm actually learning more about astronomy itself, not just photographing the stars, but learning about astronomy, and also learning about Aboriginal astronomy as well, because the projects which I've been on have been highly geared towards the Aboriginal astronomy and the cultural aspect of the sky, not just saying, this is epic, I'm enjoying this. Is actually saying, look, hey, look, that's this is the story of the emu in the sky, or about an echidna or the eagle, or any of the other objects and I suppose features. And there's just so much information out there, it's just quite overwhelming at times. You just take a step at a time.
Yeah, that's totally. I think I'm on the same boat in terms of learning the astronomy. I would love to kind of learn more about it, but it's just so many things in there. But like that holding the light thing, that was, I really love that. And when I saw that, it's just become an inspiration, and it becomes like it goes into the library of things that I could use on different conditions. I particularly love it when there is a lot of trees around you, because it will create like a halo kind of thing, or a big plane. So your work, you do a lot of panoramas, and you do crazy panoramas as well, isn't it? You do like what, 35 mil shot, like
I think the one
35
I did
mil.
just recently was about 180 image panorama.
180 image. Wow.
It took a while, and I mean there was no stacking on that as well. It was just quite literally photo next to each other. There was actually an interesting story about the panoramas as well, is that the panoramas came around because I was shooting a crop sensor lens on my full frame camera, and you know that, hey, the center of the part of each frame when you're doing of each photo is actually your sharpest part. So as a crop sensor lens on the camera, on the full frame camera, is all the lens defects were coming out around the edges. So I thought, well, in the scheme of things, if you do a panorama, you're just using all the central bits. So therefore the image quality will be better. It'll look better, basically.
Interesting.
And
Is that why you do a lot of panorama?
that's how it originally started. And then it
Uh-huh.
just kind of got carried away with that as well.
So do
Like
you
many
kinda,
things with astrophotography.
so do you
Oh,
actually
look, where's all my money gone?
oh, it's so funny because the gears never stop. It's just the backpacks get heavier, and then you just notice you need a bigger backpacks. um, so, um, okay, coming back to the panorama, do you actually like the panorama compared to the normal single image, or?
I suppose I like the panorama because it just seems to look more epic in terms of you like covering the whole band of the Milky Way core. I mean, and also as a larger image is that the stars actually get smaller.
Oh, okay, yeah,
So,
nice.
pardon me. So therefore it basically creates, I suppose, more definition in the nebulosity of the sky. And then also with the panoramas as well. Pardon me.
Right.
I guess it just has more, in my mind, a little bit more possible creativity sides of things to it. I mean, I do your singles ones, and then I rarely actually stack images, but I will stack from time to time just to say, hey, look, this is what happens if you stack. But I like doing the large panoramas because it just feels more epic, basically.
Yeah, the one thing, the one reason why I do, well, I won't say one reason, but one of the reason why I do panorama is just I like to put the viewer perspective where I was. It's like, like, look, this is what I was seeing that night, and not many people, especially with astrophotography, right, have that chance to go out there and see that kind of view. So, and that was always amazing for me to be able to kind of show people. It's like, oh yeah, there was this on that side, there was this on that side. And when I saw your photo, I was like, wow, like you just put that, the Milky Way, and having you as the center subject inside the photo so well. I was just like, wow, I gotta take photos like that. So actually, one of the boab tree that I took, one of the early one, was inspired by that. I was like, I saw your photo with you holding the flash, and then the Milky Way right around it. And I was like, I want to take a photo of the boab tree. I was like, how do I make this interesting with the Milky Way? And I was like, oh yeah, I could just have it panorama and curve around the top. So that's probably one of my favorite shot I've ever taken. So all right, well, man, that was like, yeah, that's great to hear. I want to
Can I
hear
go
more.
back on a strange tangent?
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry. I know that this is way out of sequence because I know that a while ago you said why astrophotography as well, is that ultimately it has evolved for me
Okay.
because ultimately it's also gone from apart from the sensation of feeling your humility against the massive backdrop of the universe, is that it's also has helped with, I suppose, promoting STEM, because people get interested in space and the stars at that point of time. So interest your science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and so on. It also has massive benefits for things like your mental health because of that feeling, or I suppose, of yourself against, well, not against, but with the universe. And also it has actually been helping with tourism to areas, which ultimately then helps with the mental health, the economies of various places. So it has actually evolved in terms of how the I suppose the reasoning behind astrophotography as well.
Well, going back to Australia, especially, I think that I could see how that could be a big impact to the community, because like for example, right here in the Rockies, the mountains were so stunning that you don't need the the night sky. But the back in Australia, especially Western Australia, a lot of the places are flat, right? You got this really cool interesting features that most people would notice, like the salt lake that you take photo of, that the crack on the ground, and the trees that kind of like one of your photo with the trees that kind of like just merging towards you, that was those kind of things really, I think those kind of things would really invite people to come out at night, isn't it? And that's how it kind of helps the tourism industry back in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah. Because there's so many places to go see, we're always so focused on A to B, but we don't see everything in between. So that there's all these other things around, basically, that's out there. I am missing mountains, though. It's been quite a number of years since I've gone to see any mountains, because as you said, WA is pretty flat. I mean, we've got some great skies and fantastic locations, but I think I do need to get out and see some mountains again as well, because mountains are epic in themselves, basically.
Yeah, no,
Just as long as you're not on the edge of a cliff of a mountain in the middle of the night.
Yeah, no, totally. It's just totally different things to take photo of. And I think what you say there, it was totally correct, because I drove around Australia, right? And one of the things that I noticed was that exactly what you say, we often go to that places that are popular and established, but actually, especially in Western Australia, the places that is hard to get to, that only that you need four-wheel drive, man, it, like once you get there, it's just unbelievable. Sure, you're like surrounded by the bushes and the dirts, but it's just unbelievable. It's amazing landscape. So yeah. Well, just looking at the time here. What I want to hear more. I want to hear more about that 180 panorama. How do you take them, and why 180? Why not just use a 16 millimeter lens and just have probably 14 max?
So the 180 image panorama was because I wanted to shoot at 35 mil, because I was going, oh, I've got this new lens. So I wanted to photograph the whole thing at 35 and do the panorama. So I was shooting on of course, photographing that sort of panorama takes a long time, especially if you want to do things like your 30-second exposures. So I was on a tracking mount. I was on this, and because of the weight of the camera, I used the Skywatcher Star Adventurer as because of the weight, with the mount, with the panorama head, with the camera on top. I suppose is that a shameless plug? Because yeah, they sent me the Skywatcher Star Adventurer too. So as the panorama, I basically wanted to do your longer exposures, and it brings out more detail within the stars, because you're shooting at the longer focal length. I haven't tried doing it 85 mil or anything like that for a massive panorama. A friend of mine has been doing panoramas at your 85 mil space.
Damn. Wow.
But ultimately, I just wanted the more detail in the stars, which basically means that the larger stars, I mean, all the stars look smaller, and the noise looks smaller as well. So it was just wanting to fill it up as much as possible. The reason why I was 180 is actually because I wanted to do. I actually took enough capture to do a whole 360 photosphere out of it as well. And then you crop it in to say, hey, look, this is the usable working space. I think the image ended up being about, before cropping, no, even after cropping, I think before I shrank it down to a size I could actually fit in my Lightroom catalog, it was about 40,000 pixels wide, or could have been larger than that as well. But yeah, I just like the greater detail. But I do it manually as well. So apart from being on the tracking mount, I actually click it on the pano head. So I click it one stop at a time. to cover the whole sky. I suppose I could actually just put an automated system up and actually just press the button and let the tracking mount do with, like your gigapans and so on, to let them just do the whole thing while I go to sleep in a corner somewhere. But I just prefer to do it manually. There was a point of time which I did, I think it was a 64 image panorama, which had clouds rolling through quite rapidly at the same time as the moon was setting. And I actually did think to myself, hey, I'm a little bit worried that I won't be able to do it in time. Let me just actually have a look. Is that, sorry, I'm just going to go oops. No, hang on, don't want to share that one. I want to share this one. So if you see this one here, this one was about a 60 something image panorama. And you can actually see that the clouds were actually moving quite quickly. And normally I'd actually just methodically do row after row, but this time I actually started off at the bottom. By the time I got to here, I said, hang on, the clouds are moving too quickly. So I actually started doing the top section here to make sure I got the core, and then working backwards and actually just doing like a random path throughout the whole thing. And I was actually quite fortunate that I didn't actually miss any panels in it, because that was my greatest concern after putting it all together. It actually stitched almost perfectly after I put it together.
Really? I would have thought, because I tried in the past with the clouds in it. Great photo, by the way. But I tried once with the cloud, and it just struggled to stitch it together because the cloud moving so quickly, it doesn't. It failed to create reference point between one and another.
The actually, I'll just share another quick screen. This one was the 180 image panorama.
Mm-hmm.
I did actually try something else while I was doing this one as well, but I actually I work hard on being lazy. So I actually decided not to proceed with the experiment I was doing. I did play around with the experiment, and I said, no, that's not really working. So you record and you say, well, I'll try it again in future doing something slightly differently next time, basically. Hang on.
Yeah, I've been to that place. It's a beautiful place to shoot with the Milky Way there.
But I suppose with the panorama stitches and so on, is that I'm using, as my primary panorama software, I'm using PGGUI Pro. That's not a sponsored statement. PGGUI Pro is that you can actually mask in where the image, I mean, after it stitches, you can actually mask in what you want to keep in the scene. So therefore you can say, hey, look, this cloud here, it basically, you can see the whole cloud in one panel. But then you say, well, but when you stitch it across, it's cut part of it off, but you can then mask in the bit that you want to keep from that one panel that's got all the cloud. So it makes the stitching process easier then as well. I mean, it put it all together, but then I just said, okay, I want to make sure that this is included and that's excluded, for example. And that also helps with the panorama selfies as well, self-portraits, because if I wasn't using programs like PGGUI Pro, it might actually cut half of me off when it's trying to stitch. So therefore, I'll paint in all of myself, saying I want to include all of me in the final output.
Awesome. So, like, how often do you use the Lightroom Panorama Stitcher or Lightroom and Photoshop? How often does do you get success by using them, or do you always use the PGGUI?
Well, since I've got PGGUI Pro now, I think the last time I used Lightroom was as a panorama stitcher was probably about 5 years ago. I found it was fine for doing things like your single row panoramas and so on, but as soon as I went to your 2-row panoramas, or two, I think that last one with the Carnarvon Space Center with the dish there, I think that one was about 5 or 6 rows, or I can't quite remember exactly. But as soon as you want to do your multi rows, it starts struggling quite severely. And it was actually one image that I took a number of years ago, which prompted me to go to the I suppose PT GUI Pro. Let me just have a quick look to see if I can find it. Because when I first put it together in using Lightroom as a panorama software, it looked really bad, because I get constructive criticism from someone I trust quite heavily. Mind you, she doesn't actually give me any constructive criticism anymore. Says, oh wow, it's a fantastic image. But I used to go to her quite frequently saying, well, what do you think? And she actually said, well, there's something quite seriously wrong with it, basically. And and this particular image, which was actually using a crop sensor lens, this was my first multi-row panoramas, and it didn't actually work at all using Lightroom. Is that the perspective just didn't work? And this is actually when I tried a different format for your panorama stitching that created this sort of fisheye effect. And then it worked. I know it looks very fantasy sort of thing, but it actually, all those frames in the panel were actually there. I think it was a 13% luminosity moon. And then this one went off and won, I suppose, an award, ended up in newspapers and all sorts of things around the world. And that one was quite strange, really, because it just looks weird.
I quite like the perspective on that one. I know, because when you do panorama, it changed your perspective, right? Because you kind of try to flatten a 360 basically, or a sphere, I suppose. So then you have that effect on the photo, and I think that works quite well on that one. It kind of framed the Milky Way, as well as the whatever that limestone is. That's in
That's up at the
pinnacles, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and that particular photo, we weren't actually going to go either, because it was actually raining probably about 2 hours before then. So the only reason why I went was my older brother actually came into Perth and said, I want to go shoot photograph. And it's not really great weather for it. And that's, I suppose, another thing as well, is that sometimes the better photos are actually when the conditions are not perfect.
Yeah, no, that's I totally agree. The weird condition gives you a really cool photo, but I know, like, sometimes you have a higher risk of not getting anything. But you also have, I suppose, that whole thing about high risk high gain thing, right? Like the more risk you put it out there, the more gain you might get. So man, that was awesome. I love talking about this. There's so much that I could learn from you. But coming on to the hour mark, and I wanna ask you to give an advice or two for the listener who been wanting to kind of shoot astrophotography, or even just to give it a try. What is the easiest way to try without having all these false belief telling you that you can't?
I suppose I guess that's exactly what you're saying there as well. It's not that there is the false belief, is that you can photograph the Milky Way now with some phones. When people say, oh, you must have good equipment, for example, I was like pointing towards this photo here. It was quite literally, it's a compact camera, and I just set it down and took a photo of the Milky Way.
Perfect.
I mean, the only thing that this camera had was basically manual settings, and I think the ISO it tipped out at was 3200, and the maximum shutter it could do was 15 seconds, and it was an f2 camera, I think.
Perfect.
So
I think that is gonna be a lot of push for people out there, that wait to get their $5,000 camera to shoot out there. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah. So apart from just giving it a shot, is that ultimately your camera is most likely to be able to do something. You just need to go somewhere dark. And when you go somewhere, is try a variety of things out. Because while everyone's comfortable with the idea of shooting, I mean, when I started photographing astrophotography, it was very formulatic, if that's even a word. You're saying f2.8, 30 seconds, ISO 1600, don't go above 1600. And all of a sudden, I mean, sometimes I shoot 12,800 or even higher, depending on how I feel. But I mean, I generally speaking, like going a little bit lower than that and using your tracking mounts, because you do have your signal to noise ratios and so on. You do start losing stuff after a while. But is try a number of things, take a number of images, so you can do things like you're stacking later on to experiment with things. It's great as an experimental sort of medium. You can experiment with all sorts of things. You don't have to go ultra wide. You can go longer focal length. It will just have a different look. That's all. There's so many things you can experiment with astrophotography. There was something else that just floated into my head, but of course with astrophotography and many things, it floats into your head and back out of your head as well. In terms of, I suppose, you're experimenting and trying things out. But yeah, it's just try many things out. Don't just rely, get uncomfortable is probably the best way to say it with your astrophotography. Do things that you wouldn't normally try to do. Shoot at ISO 26,000, whatever. Just try things, or 25,000, whatever. Just try things out. You might look at it later on and say that's rubbish, but you tried it, because most people don't go out. Sorry, I'm just waiting for my camera to start working. Most people don't go out and photograph the astrophotography every day. I know I get paid for it, but most people don't go out and do it every day. So it's get as much data as you can as possible to experiment with things. And that's right. And make sure you actually put down the camera later on. And I mean, it might be time lapsing or whatever, and just actually enjoy it. Because enjoying where you are, it helps you create, I suppose, lets you represent what you felt when you were out there as well. It's not just about saying, I need a great photo. It's actually saying, well, how does it make you feel?
That is great advice. Especially, you know, that last bit where you say, you know, how does that make you feel? That is such a great advice there. And yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that is very powerful. I think, you know, when I started astrophotography, it was quite intimidating with all the settings, but shooting stars is the easiest thing you can do, because the exposure doesn't change. It's always like that. You know, you shoot sunset, it changes every time, but the stars always have the same exposure. So once you dial that in, it's all about experimenting to get that higher quality. So you're exactly right there. Well, thanks a lot, Michael, for joining us here. And for those people who want to learn more about yourself and see more of your epic astrophotography, where is the best place for them to go?
Well, I suppose I'm terrible with social media, by the way, or even website updates. And I know I'm about 2 years behind on my YouTube channel updates at the moment as well. But there's ultimately I'm on Astrophotobear on Instagram and on Facebook. I've also my website is astrophotobear.com. I've also created I think it was michaelgo.com.au recently as well, because like I said, I need to actually sound a little bit more professional, but all that does is actually route you through to astrophotobear.com. And I've actually been putting a lot more in the story side of things on social media rather than actually posting up, because I've just been so busy. So that's more of, but I do need to put up more on your behind the scenes, because ultimately that's what I want to get across to people, saying, look, this is what I'm actually doing to actually achieve these results, to actually do these things. And this is why things are happening.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Michael. And yeah, you've seen how many of photos you shared? I think 3 photos, and they were all epic. So highly recommend you to check out, some of his photos. It's just so inspiring. Definitely when I first got into photography, I saw one of Michael photo and I was just like, yeah, I want to learn how to take photo like that. So thanks a lot, Wiki Hunters, for tuning in, and hopefully you get a lot of gem there in terms of astrophotography. And it was so much interesting story from Michael himself. So hopefully you enjoy that, and let us know in the comment below if you do enjoy and what part of it you enjoy the most. And for those YouTubers out there, don't forget to subscribe on down here and then turn on that little notification button. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, that way you will know when I release a new podcast or a new video. Well, thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see you next week. All right, well, catch you later, Michael. Thanks a lot for being here.
Yes, Emily. Thanks for having me.